Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, the transfer portal. It's been very busy the last couple of days. And, as a college football fan, you can get really distracted about all the new shiny players that have hit the transfer portal. And, you see some programs go after so many players in the transfer portal, they forget to kind of take care of what's on their roster. Although Florida has not landed, well, besides Tommy Doman, the punter, although Florida has not landed a transfer portal commitment so far outside of the punter, I still consider them to be one of the more successful teams in the transfer portal so far because they are retaining a lot of really good players from that 2024 year. Not only some of the young bucks, some of the guys that are kind of going up through this program, but more importantly, a lot of guys that could have left to the NFL draft are deciding to come back for one more year in 2025. It's not always the flashiest news to talk about, but getting guys like Caleb Banks back in for 2025, that's about as good of a defensive lineman as you would land in the transfer portal. You're essentially getting him back for 2025. Let's go over the five most important returning players or players that are slated to return so far to this roster heading into 2025, with the caveat being they're draft eligible guys that could go to the NFL but are deciding to come back for one more year. So you're not going to see guys like DJ Lagway on the list. Obviously would be number one if we wanted to include him. Fired up to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, to the Florida fans. Talking this team in the portal, talking this team to close out the 2025 high school recruiting trail. It's been a blast for the boys. Ton of support from you guys. Appreciate it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And I think more importantly, let it fly in the comment section with your top five. And again, what we're kind of working with here is guys that could go to the NFL that are deciding to come back for one more year. Dill, I think we have to open it up with Caleb Banks. We both have him number one. We made these lists separately. I'll give you the T-box here. Caleb Banks coming back to Florida in 2025. How are we feeling about it?
Yeah, and that's an obvious one. Like the way he started to play down the stretch, highlighted by the LSU game. I mean, he was so thoroughly dominant in that game, really largely unblockable. And when you have defensive tackles playing that way, where they're being hyper disruptive, they're winning their blocks, it's really, really hard for an offense to kind of deal with that. So when you have those dominant guys in the middle, like Caleb Banks started to really play that way towards the end of the year, yeah, that's huge to get him back.
19 quarterback hurries and 11% pass rush win rate from the inside is massive. I think you look at Florida, and one of the positions of concern, you might say, is some depth on the defensive line, particularly on the inside. We were talking about all these transfer portal additions. I kind of was working under the assumption that Caleb Banks would go to the NFL after the last 6 weeks he had at 2024. Him coming back, that's a way better retention of a player than any player you could get from the transfer portal. Again, it's fun to talk about new players, guys like Keyshawn Silver. The fact that Caleb Banks is coming back to Florida, a significant storyline for the Gators. Number two, Dill, this is where I probably disagree with you. You got Shamar James, and it has nothing to do with my take on Shamar James, who I think is a very, very good off-ball linebacker for Florida, a guy that probably could go. If Shamar James might go still. Like those traits that he has, that's going to be very attractive to NFL teams. The reason I don't have him in my top five, these linebackers coming up, like it is such a loaded room. You talk about Pup Howard, Jaden Robinson, Miles Graham, Aiden Childs. Yes, Shamar James is awesome, but because you have so many young linebackers, he's a little bit lower on the list than he is for you.
And that's fair. Again, I felt like he was another guy who felt like it started clicking down the stretch where he was playing dominant football. And the one thing you can't really replace is his experience. I mean, he's been playing really since he was a true freshman. He is turning into the leader of that defense. I think that's big to get back, especially because you are still going to be rather young at the linebacker spot. Not super talented, obviously, but other than Shamar James, you're awfully young at that spot.
Yeah, that's fair. And that leadership you get from him and I think the real storyline here is, like, what can he be if he comes back?
Well, that's why I'm thinking I would love to see him come back because, frankly, like his draft stock, I think could go way up because you really haven't seen sustained dominance from him. Again, last couple games of the year, like a lot of players have felt like on Florida, they turned it up a little bit. But, man, he puts together a 12-game season and plays really well. Like, yeah, traits off the wall, he'd be a really high pick.
And what Coach Roberts is doing with these backers, like you can tell it's starting to click for a lot of them, not just Shamar James. I'm going Tyreek Sapp. I think one of the most underrated players on this Florida game, and it's because he's not flashy, man. Like, he's not flashy. Guess who led Florida in run stops in 2024? It wasn't the off-ball. It was Tyreek Sapp with an average depth of tackle of 0.6 yards down the field. He's a solid pass rusher. I mean, 14 quarterback hurries, 13% pass rush win rate. That's going to make Billy Napier smile. But what he does against the run and how he sets an edge, Tyreek Sapp's the guy that it – look, Tyreek Sapp and Princely U from last year. A little bit of a stray at Princely U, but Princely was a very, very good pass rusher, right? Nobody's arguing that. But was kind of a liability at times stopping the run. Tyreek Sapp, maybe not as much juice rushing the passer as Princely, significantly better stopping the run. You want to create more negative plays and sacks. Start winning on first and second down. Force teams to operate in those second and third and long, obvious passing situations. Tyreek Sapp's one of those guys who does that. Give me Tyreek Sapp as a massive potential returner for the Florida Gators in 2025.
Yeah, I would never argue with any of that. Again, his physicality at that defensive end spot is about as unique as you'll see in college football. I feel like that's almost like people sleep on. Like,
oh yeah,
he isn't that like overly twitched up pass rusher, but a very disruptive pass rusher in a sense, because he does do a good job collapsing pockets and being physical. But man, his ability in the run game, really, really unique. That's why I have him at 4. I mean, I go to my third guy. You talk about kind of cornerstone pieces. Like Jake Slaughter is another guy who, when I look at him, I don't look, ooh, that's like an NFL player. He's certainly a guy who I think if he goes to draft, has the chance to get drafted. Another guy, I think another year of just being really rock solid, consistent play could do a lot for himself, but also a lot for Florida, because his play, when I go back and watch, he is a cornerstone of what they're doing in the run game and how solid he is.
Nobody talked about him in 2023. He was probably the best offensive lineman on that Florida Gators team, coming in at the center spot. And then obviously just continued the success in 2024. One of the really fun storylines, if you're a Florida Gator fan, is that Slaughter, Barber, Damian George hit the portal for like 12 hours, but he's coming back to Florida. Nigel, you might return 4 of your starting offensive linemen, with only Crenshaw Dixon being the one who's going to the NFL. Again, you're returning DJ Lagway, you're returning Jaden Baugh, you're returning some dynamic pass catchers on the outside, but returning 4 out of your 5 starters with a lot of young pups kind of still developing that pipeline, that's massive. I went with Austin Barber just because, look, Austin Barber took his lumps in 2023 transitioning to the left side of the offensive line. Thought was significantly better in 2024. At the end of the day, you're returning a guy who would be, if he comes back for 2025, a 4-year starter, a 3-year starter at the left tackle position, has played over 1,900 snaps, only gave up 2 sacks, 8 quarterback hurries in 2024. Austin Barber's another one of those guys where it's not going to make national media headline if he decides to return. You got a bona fide dude at one of the tackle spots, and that's meaningful if you're Florida. You have Tyreek Sapp, we talked about. I'm surprised that you didn't put George Gums on this list.
I was fighting him and Devin Moore. I was like, who do I go with?
And Devin Moore is very good. So there's a lot of players you could go with this. The reason I went with George Gums at 4, which is a little high, and it probably doesn't match the production you saw from him in 2024. I feel like people forget this kid was a MAC kid who came into college as a pass catcher. Big-bodied wide receiver, H-back tight end, made the transition to the defensive side of the football, really flashed some good stuff in 2023 in the MAC, came to the SEC. He looks the part, right? And you see the flashes. For me, it's like, okay, is he one of the 5 best players returning right now? Probably not. What can he be in 2025 when he gets another full year to kind of refine himself as an edge rusher and adjust to the SEC landscape? George Gums, to me, has the potential to be an elite pass rusher for Florida in 2025. Sign me up for George Gums.
That's a good point, because like Florida, again, like he probably showed when he was at his best, he was the best pure pass rusher on that team for sure. And you just look at the traits, like a guy, again, I feel like if he went to the NFL draft, probably does get drafted, just because there's not a lot of guys built that way and have that amount of athleticism. But another guy I look at like, man, there's a lot in there. There's a lot more to get from him at the college level, and opportunity to frankly increase his own draft stock. And that was one thing that early on in the season, I didn't think Florida's pass rush was good enough. It was a huge part of why I think their defense was struggling. When those guys started to emerge, like Caleb Banks, Tyreek Sapp was obviously pretty consistent, but then you get a George Gunn starting to get rolling. Like you saw that pass rush take off a little bit, and I think that helped everything, including the second.
He's one of the players where the light's flickering. Can it turn on in 2025? Devin Moore 5 for you. I was about to go with Devin Moore. That had a little bit more to do with I kind of agree with Devin Moore. I'll let you sell me on him.
And it's a lot of it is because they're going to be so young in the second.
Yeah.
Not in the like their safety, obviously the safety duo of Thornton and Castile. Like you love that group.
Yep.
I like the young cornerbacks in that room. I like guys like Jameer Grimsley coming up, obviously, but him and Deshaun Johnson, I think, can be a really, really bang up pair. And he's the only guy who's like kind of that draft eligible experienced guy who I think really, if they get him back, that again, I think you have a better mix of young and old guys with experience playing, guys with a lot of potential. You even look at a guy like Cormani McLean, very fascinating story, obviously, but I think you want his stability and his like.
I'm with that. I could kind of similar argument you made with Shamar James. You lose. I mean, Triquez Bridges, I thought he came in more of like a depth piece, emerged as an absolute dude for Florida. Obviously, Jason Marshall was playing well. Yeah, I'm with you. Like, just some experience. I want Damian George. Like, he was not going to tackle in 2023. He was very bad. One of the worst tackles in the SEC. Kick down to guard. He was, nobody's talking about. He's pretty damn good. And like, shout out to Florida Gator fans. So Damian George hits the portal. I'm kind of interested to see like what the fan reaction is to the Florida fan or from the Florida fans. And they were like, damn, like he was low key playing some really good football for us on the inside. And I was like, I agree. Like Damian George has a little stigma around him because it was bad in 2023 at tackle. Got him more in his natural position at guard. I thought he looked pretty dang good, was moving some bodies in the run game. Maybe it's not that important because you look at like Rod, Bryce Lovett, like some players that I like too. But I thought Jamie, again, when you get the chance to return potentially 4 out of your 5 starting offensive line, like that continuity, a lot of those guys have played 3 years together now. That'd be a huge storyline. So again, you look at Florida and say, all right, you haven't gotten as active as you wanted in the transfer portal. I think they're doing just fine, making sure this roster is staying intact, and largely it has been. I haven't looked at that many guys and said, oh, damn, like, you're really going to, like, Arliss Boardingham, maybe. You get into one player I want to mention before we get out of here that I really would like to see them make sure they get. J. Michael Sturdivant was on campus this weekend. Sounds like he's going to go take a look at some other schools. You got to sell him. You got to sell him as being that big-bodied vertical wide receiver in this offense. I think that is what Florida is missing. You look at DJ Lagway, probably, I'm going to say it, true freshman, probably throws the best deep ball in the country. This is a perfect fit for him. So if they can get this one done or some wide receiver like this, I think it'd mean the world for DJ Lagway in 2025. We'll cut it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it again. Kind of a different transfer portal conversation. I thought it was fun. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.